Hey everyone, welcome to the Lake Michigan Angler Podcast. Today we're here with Captain Rick Bentley of Windy City Salmon out of Waukegan, Illinois.
Welcome.
Hello.
Super cool. We get to finally talk about Waukegan, a very important port out of Illinois. Before we jump into all of that, there's a lot to kind of break down as far as how to fish it, why you fish it, kind of like the experience through all of it. Let everybody know a little bit about your background, how you got started into Salmon Fishing Lake Michigan, how you started your business, why you decided to do all that, just a rundown.
Yeah, I'm Captain Rick Bentley of Windy City Salmon. I run a boat called the Independence. My roots in the fishery go back to the mid to late 80s into the 90s when I was the first mate on a number of boats for a lot of old-timer captains. I went on to college, worked in finance for 13 years, and decided to make a switch in my life, and that was in '08, and so this upcoming season will be 16 years on the water. A lot of the guys I used to fish with are no longer fishing, either have passed on, retired, moved on, etc. But it was a very, very different fishery back then. It was a different lake back then. Yeah,
it's definitely changed as we've documented pretty much with a lot of our guests. Making the change, you said you were in finance for 13 years. Was that a scary step to say, you know what, I'm going to leave this alone, I'm going to just pursue this passion of mine? And what was that like in your beginnings and that transition?
It was the most exciting time in my life, honestly.
Yeah.
What
decade was this?
That was I had quit my job in late '07, December of '07.
Early 2000.
I literally walked in and said I quit and walked back out. I wrote my resignation letter on a legal pad and put it on my boss's desk, and that was about it. The boat had been bought already. I just didn't know when I was going to take that final step.
Sure.
So there were some straws that broke finally, and then that's what pushed me over to take this final step. But fear is the ultimate motivator to be successful.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it unleashed like a creative burst in myself. And running a business, there's nothing else like it, really. Being your own person, there's nothing else like it. I look back really fondly on the years of getting the business going, growing the business. My growth phase ended a long time ago. I kind of missed that, but not having to focus on that end of things allows me to super focus back on fishing strategies, and it frees up my mind a lot.
Got you. So let's kind of dive into Waukegan. Obviously, our shop and what we talk about as it pertains to salmon fishing on Lake Michigan is all within this area, let's say Waukegan to, racing for general purposes. Now, as far as Waukegan goes, what is it about Waukegan that makes it a great port out of Illinois and especially just produces so well? And at least in my recent memory, it's been doing very well. It's been producing really well for shore guys, kayak guys, the boaters, of course. It's really just been doing just very, very well. And so could you explain what you believe and what you see year over year, what makes Waukegan kind of unique and productive?
There's always something to catch. Most everybody starts their season in April, whether it's early April, mid-April, late April. The April fishery is different from the May fishery. The June fishery sometimes resembles the May fishery, and then July and August sometimes resemble each other. And the species abundance from the beginning to the middle to the end, there's always something there. And most of the captains, when we're with our guests on the boat, one of the most common questions is, when's the best time to come? Well, out of Waukegan and North Point and Kenosha to a certain extent, it depends what you want to catch. Do you want to catch coho? Do you want to catch brown trout? Do you want to catch lake trout? Do you want to catch steelhead? Steelhead being the toughest to target, but still always available to a certain extent. But this overall corner of the lake, from Waukegan to Kenosha, probably offers the longest and the most diverse seasons, to my knowledge, on the whole lake. You know, it changes a lot as you go north. It changes a lot on the other side of the lake. Yeah, we don't have the giant kings. We have big kings, but you know, they lack the coho fishing that we have, and that the coho side of things is really this is coho corner, and but also what Waukegan offers, especially, is from Waukegan to Montrose, there's very little fishing. It's like virgin water, so to speak. And so a lot of guys out of Waukegan, we find ourselves going south a lot. It's because it's not like we don't want to mix with the North Point boats, but if we can find fish in untouched stretches of water,
right,
we're going to do it. You
right.
know? Less competition.
Yeah, and you just whack them because
Right.
you're by yourself.
Especially depending upon species too. Even coho, to a certain extent, will be, you know, they'll start to feel the boat traffic and the pressure, and you know, especially in the spring when you've got other boats that come down from other ports and tie up at Winthrop Harbor, and then you've got all that much more pressure of, you know, 20, 30 fish taken morning and afternoon every single day. That has an effect on the fish. And so,
Sure.
So for that reason, you know, going south for us, we would prefer to go south more often than not.
It certainly seems like you mentioned, right? I think Montrose might be, correct me if I'm wrong here, one of the last harbors you can fish out of, because between Montrose and Waukegan, is there anything else?
Wilmette.
Oh, okay.
But no charters.
But there's no,
Yeah, it's
right.
very
it's
little
not-
fishing pressure.
Right. So like you said, that water, it's almost like a sanctuary. These fish can transition through there and not really be bothered too much. So you do kind of get first crack, whether they stop in Waukegan first or if you kind of go south to them, you have that access. When you're going south, though, do you tend to run into more Lakers as the further south you go?
If you're offshore, I believe so, yeah. But even then, the further south you go, the farther offshore you need to get to the depths that the Lakers are going to be in the summer, where the cold water is. But also, you will run into quite a few Lakers in the spring in shallow, and catching those fish in the shallow cold water in the spring, it's a whole different fish than pulling a lake trout from 100 feet of water and down. It's a hard fighting fish. It's a fish that's a lot of fun to catch.
Yes. I always say that too. Me and Rob talk about it. Like in the cold water, like right now, if you go out, you know, if you jig for them, you can hit them off the break walls, cast and stuff like that. In that cold water, they're alive, and they will definitely, on spinning tackle, light tackle, it can be a lot of fun on a day where, you know, some other fish might not be around the coho or not around yet or whatever. You can still have a lot of fun with them. And as you've been fishing this entire time, how have you seen the area change for you?
Water clarity, of course. I mean, everybody, that's no secret. Everybody knows that. I would say, you know, what pops into my mind right now, and when it comes to lake trout fishing in the late summer and the fall, is I believe we hit peak mussels probably about 8, 9, 10 years ago. And the reason why I think that is because with the lack of kings over the past 7, 8 years or so, right? We've had to fish for lake trout out of Waukegan. It usually occurs in August sometimes. Some seasons it's been as early as the first part of August, and that kind of stinks. But sometimes it's been mid-August, sometimes it's been late August, or even the beginning part of September, where we're forced just to put fish in the boxes. We have to go target lake trout at that point. But before peak mussels, we couldn't tap the bottom, drag the bottom, bounce the bottom the way we used to in the 80s to catch lake trout. But when we were forced to fish for lake trout, as of about 7 or 8 years ago, in this late summer and fall, that time period, now we can do it without hanging up with mussels. And that is highly suggestive of peak mussel environment. It's not to suggest that we hit peak mussels all over the lake, but I think in this particular
area.
region, I think we have, yeah.
Yeah.
And even to push that theory further is over the past 4 years, if I'm remembering correctly, when we're catching lake trout offshore, mid-August, late August into September, those lake trout no longer have gobies in their stomach. And the reason why gobies had existed there before was because of a population of zebras that is probably no longer there.
That's actually pretty, yeah, like you said, it kind of supports the whole theory there, right?
Now, last year was a bit different. I couldn't fish most of August last year because I had a health issue going on. But up to the point when I was fishing and talking to the other guys that were fishing, there were a lot of alewives there. That was something that we had not seen in a couple of years, and I don't know whether it's just by pure chance or not. It probably is.
I think that was the same point at which we started seeing the die-off. Was it late July when I started posting, and then
I
August?
don't remember exactly. It might have been a little earlier to die off.
Was it?
I mean, in the past, we usually see them in June.
Yeah,
Yeah.
May and June when
Yeah.
Yeah.
post spawn typically.
Yeah, that's usually, and then you see that, like, the water temperature makes that little bit of a
Yeah.
spike, and
Yeah, I was trying to remember, but certainly after that happened, then everyone was hyper aware that there was a lot of bait everywhere. I mean, the massive bait balls you troll, and you just see like this mega schools of them all.
I think we've been under the impression, captains that fish a lot, I think we've been under the impression, our own impression over the past 3 years, that we've had a lot more alewives in the lake than what the DNR has been aware of. I know there are a lot of arguments and debates and conspiracies that go in all different kinds of directions, but I think what we see on a daily basis probably runs, in my opinion, it probably runs a couple of years ahead of what the DNR realizes is actually going on. It's not to suggest we're scientists or anything like that, but we do see a lot.
No, it makes sense, right? Think about it like this: when they're getting their research data together, they're doing surveys, right? And they could be via netting or however they do these kinds of things, right? But when you have a community of anglers, day in, day out, going twice a day out there, you can put together, you can put something there, a theory together based off of the information coming in. All three of us have the same experience, there's something
the
to
on the
it.
water experience means a lot.
Yeah,
like, it really
yeah.
goes a long
And the
way.
charter guys are seeing it every day, and there's 20 plus all talking to it. There's a trend here. I think you can start to correlate that with something going on, and because they're out every day, you're able to kind of put these ideas together faster than the DNR because they're having to wait, and they got stipulations and maybe how they go about it. So
Yeah, and I think the DNR is starting to see that too. Like, they're kind of waking up. to it.
yeah, it would be, I don't know. I should ask you this, right? To what extent does the DNR work with charters to get this information more effectively, efficiently, more timely? Can you answer that?
The answer is they in Illinois, they don't. That's not an indictment on the DNR. I don't know to what extent the Illinois DNR does acoustical and netting surveys. I think that happens farther north in the lake, which isn't in Illinois' hands. I've had conversations with Vic, and good conversations, and we are. I think there was a meeting in March last year, and if there was, I didn't make it. There's another one coming up in March, on March 16th, which I'm not sure whether it's a public or just a captain's or I'm not really sure, but I plan to go to that. But so to my understanding, when the DNR does their surveys, they do an acoustical survey, and then they do a netting survey. I think their limitations are the amount of surveys that they do. I don't think they do a whole lot over the year, whereas the limitations on the captains, even though we're out every single day, or mostly every single day, our limitations are we're only fishing in our little section of the lake. So we both have our limitations, and in the perfect world, it should be all put together.
Right. Some kind of, right, yes.
A better interface.
Yeah, right. Where maybe they could tap you guys to do something that they can't, and then they're doing stuff that obviously, and then they can get the information. That's ultimately what I believe in. And again, that's always going to be an ongoing effort. But listen, the fish is there. Something's going right, you know. So I want to circle back though. Earlier when we first started the conversation here, you had mentioned that what's great about Waukegan, or in this area in general, but Waukegan, is that there's always something to catch. So run me down every month starting from January. What's the one species for that month that is like you can go and fish for?
So right now it's
starting January. We're starting January.
Oh, in January.
Yeah.
Well,
and what's the one fish?
I would say shallow water lake trout, honestly.
Okay.
That is reliable and probably abundant.
Yeah.
Whether you want to catch them or not, because there's this stigma
Yeah,
that
sure.
lake trout have, and that stigma has remained for a long time. And just to sidetrack, back in the 80s, in what were called the BKD years, which is a similar situation, somewhat similar situation that we have gone through over the past 7 years, but just a general lack of kings for different reasons. BKD was something that was called the bacterial kidney disease, and it was killing kings from a young age. And so there were like 3 years where we had very few kings. And so, you know, and then back then it was cohos and kings. It was coho in the spring, kings in the summer, and anything else you got, it was bonus or just extra bycatch. But the Wisconsin fishery was very different back then, to my knowledge as a kid. You know, again, I'm speaking from a standpoint of a 15, 16, 17-year-old person. My knowledge was you went to the hills and you dragged wire lines, and you limited out on lake trout, and if you wanted to fish extra, you could, otherwise you can go in. Those were fishing on the hills. There were a group of guys that came down from that area to fish out of Waukegan for a number of years, and they knew how to catch lake trout. We didn't know how to catch lake trout. A couple guys did, but that was what got us turning to lake trout as a reliable species. Not to say that you could do it day in and day out, but at least it gave you something to fish for instead of fishing for something that didn't exist.
Right, in the area.
Which is sort of the environment that we've been in over the past 7 years with the lack of kings. But now that we've got more brown trout, now that we've got more steelhead, and now that we've got an enormous population of lake trout, our summers with lack of kings look a lot better than the summers did back in those BKD years.
Sure. February, same thing? Lake
Probably
trout?
the same thing, yeah.
March?
March, now, because I've never been on the water, well, no, I take that back. We had a very mild spring, 2013 or so. Okay. And I was able to get in like 5 charters in March, and that was highly unusual. Those trips, I went offshore, not far offshore, but like 70 to 90 feet of water for lake trout. Okay. Tapping the bottom, and they were big lake trout, and there were a lot of lake trout. So let's move to April.
He's tired of saying lake trout.
because April is one of my favorite times of the year. It's cold out there, or it can be cold. It can be beautiful. If the sun is shining and the wind isn't blowing, it is a phenomenal time to be on the water. But I am typically fishing shallow and down the south shoreline from Great Lakes Naval Base until about Fort Sheridan. And the fishery down there is typically brown trout, lake trout, and sometimes coho, sometimes not coho, sometimes a lot of coho, sometimes not many coho. So my spread is mixed. It's typically short lengths of lead core, a couple of yellowbird, and those have spoons on them. Yeah. I've got yellowbirds with orange dodger and flies. I'm running 4 divers. The outside divers have spoons on them. The inside divers have red dodgers, orange dodgers.
And these are shallow, right? You're like just a few feet back, or?
Well, I'm fishing in anywhere between 16 to 32 feet of water or so. So I'm going to be fishing the entire water column there. And then 2 or 3 riggers, and it's going to be oriented towards all 3 of those species. And some days it's going to be more brown trout, some days it's going to be more lake trout, some days some coho mixed in.
What about that area do you think keeps those fish in there? Because a lot of times, you know, up here we're not going to see fish like that this early, at least not as many. But down there, it seems to be a lot of fish early in the year.
And let me piggyback off that because what I was gonna say too kind of tags into that is we know kayak guys that'll launch out of Tower Road or what's the other one? There's another spot over there north of that, but and they'll go to town on the browns. It seems to be the browns there are like the coho, the ones that are easily mistaken as coho. So it seems like it's an area where maybe juveniles tend to congregate. Is that your experience in that area with browns?
I think it's because of the structure that's down there, the humps and bumps, and I don't know if it's rumor or back when they used to dredge the channel in Waukegan for the shipping channel. Rumor has it they used to take a lot of that sediment and dump it down there. Okay. So I think that's created a lot of humps and bumps. Whether that was the reason or not, it really doesn't even matter. We just know that it exists. There's lots of contour, and I think the browns like that. Browns are a structure-oriented fish, in my opinion. I think the lake trout like it also, but I think there's a lot of gobies living in there too. As far as why the coho like it down there sometimes, I think that probably has more to do with the schools of coho or the schools of alewives that might be coming up from the south end of the lake. And even if it isn't that reason, it's probably because of temperature reasons. The water can get stained up down there after a northeast wind battering that shoreline. That stained water will warm up a little bit more than the rest. Plus it's shallower, so that'll warm it up a little bit more. Plus it's further south, that'll warm it up a little bit more. But again, I'm not down there for coho. If I catch coho, fantastic. But I'm more down there for the lake trout and the brown trout. And that fishery will last until, it depends on the season. It'll last up until about the early part of May or so. The past couple of seasons have been a little bit different. We've had bait at Waukegan Harbor by the 25th of April or so, or even sooner. Yeah. And so when, it's kind of funny when we all ask each other, so what's the season going to look like at the outset? Are we gonna have coho right away? It depends more on the alewives than anything else. The coho aren't just going to typically the coho aren't going to be showing up without the alewives. Well, the masses of coho.
Yeah, the mother main school. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll have the residents that Rob had said. They're already catching coho there right now. You're going to have the residents there, and there's theories as to why you have residents. Are they residents that were stocked and they just stayed there all winter long, and they subsisted on gobies because cohos do feed on gobies a lot. So it depends on the bait fish movements, and so the bait fish movements are also going to determine how long that, especially the brown trout, on what the brown trout do. In my opinion, when you're catching brown trout and you're catching the lake trout in shallow in April, you're going to be doing the best when you only have the resident gobies living there. Once you get a lot of bait fish in there, you don't want to be there anymore, because now you're competing against two natural bait sources. Right. You want to be offering selections that, well, I don't know how to put this. You just
want to compete with the natural forest.
They already have two natural choices, and once they have two natural choices and your artificial choice, it's not going to be. It's not.
It's like they have an option between a burger and a steak, and you're offering a TV dinner.
Yeah, you know that was something that just kind of was impressed upon me over the past season was when the alewives show up. Why does the brown trout bite die off? And I was thinking, well, maybe are the brown trout, are they confused because they've got these more bait sources, these additional bait sources? But no, it's just because they don't want your artificial stuff anymore. They're not aggressively going after the impulse bite.
Yeah, Rob and I have both talked about we have to dedicate an entire show just to brown trout, because there's so many questions about what they do, where do they go in the summer, all these things, and there's such an interesting. I think out of all the five we have, they're definitely the most intriguing in terms of kind of what they're got going on. You know, we know they're around, and when it's cold, they'll come into the harbors, and then they disappear for a while, and all these kinds of things. But it sounds like you've got a nice thing going where you're able to hone in on them for these time periods and get on their bite up until all the bait floods it, and then it makes it more challenging because they have so many options.
But usually when the bait's here, then the cohos are here,
Right.
and now you have that to move on to.
Right.
Yeah, and you could that last year was an excellent illustration as to when the bait arrives, and I mean, and it can happen overnight. It can happen over a 48-hour period of time. When the bait arrives, the coho are going to be there, and it might be a trickle, or they might just have just a wave of fish, and that happened last year, and I believe it happened like 26th, 27th, 28th of April. So we'll see what this year looks like.
Was that the period when we saw we had the cookie cutter coho, and then we talked about it before, there was like a week after these 3 to 5 pounders showed up, and that's like above average for what a normal springtime coho is. They started getting like these 4 or 5 pounders solids. I'm like, this is a bigger uptick. Would you say that was that period?
I don't know, because I know that some of the guys that were pier fishing were catching some of the larger coho, but I don't know whether that was after all that happened or before.
Gotcha.
And I think it also might depend on, is the bait coming in from down south and they're pulling coho from down south, which have been feeding on the bait all that,
all the time
for weeks or 6 weeks?
Yeah.
Or is it bait that's coming in from the east, from offshore, and they're pulling in the
bigger guys are out there, perhaps?
No, I think the bigger guys would be down south, honestly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they have been feeding on them for 4, 5, 6 weeks, whereas I believe the offshore coho will not have fed as heavily on the bait out deep.
Got you. So then we move into May, and I guess it's no secret here what we're focusing on in May. It's coho.
Coho, yep.
And then that runs us into June. What are we looking at in June in terms of primarily?
Depends on the season. Up until 2020. 2020 was the turning point of bait showing up early, coho showing up early. I shouldn't even say early, more traditional time frames. Whereas we went through about a 4 to 5 year period where there were some years we waited for coho to come, alewives to come until June 1st, late May. And all of us were like, what is going on here? And it's got us nervous and worried, and it's like the lake's going to hell, and just, it's just...
Doom and gloom.
Right.
It's a dumpster fire, run.
It's just, it's nature. Nature doesn't look at a calendar. Doesn't look at a clock, and movements just are different each year. Now, the old timers will say that a hard winter a lot of times we'll bring in the bait early. We haven't really had a hard winter.
No.
It doesn't mean they can't be, because last year wasn't a hard winter either.
No, I think the last few winters were mild, and they were pretty good years, I think.
I think it might have been 2020, either 2020 or 2021, where we did have a hard February. We had a lot of snow. I was up cross-country skiing at Petrifying Springs a lot that February and loving it. That might have brought in the bait early. It doesn't mean you have to have a hard winter to bring the bait in early, but it would be a better guarantee for it. So I think this spring, whether we get bait early or not, it's a crapshoot.
Well, that's interesting, right? Isn't the idea if we have too harsh of a winter, it could damage the bait, and it's too extreme for them to survive through it?
I think it depends on if it's a hard winter all winter long.
I see.
We know we had a very mild winter up until that real cold snap over Christmas.
Yeah,
that was mild.
And we've had pockets this winter. It'd be a week or two, and then it'll thaw out again, or rain again.
Yeah,
temperature go up to 40 a little bit, and then stay like that for a
then
little bit.
Back to negative 20.
Yeah, very bipolar is normal.
Yeah, no, and I think these overall mild winters have helped our bait fish populations. I think they've helped the entire food chain. They've probably fostered a better environment for coho to feed more heavily into throughout the winter.
Cold, yeah.
The one theory that was posed to me by one captain, and I'll just call him an old timer because he is. He had a theory that maybe it's because of all the salt that we put on the roads that ends up in the lake, create some kind of bloom in the late winter and early spring in the water, I mean, it holds some merit.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. We should do an episode all on theories,
Yeah.
like all the various.
Right. I mean, none of them can be really proven.
No, you know.
So they're fun.
I think, but it makes for good conversation in a podcast or,
Yeah.
you know, at the dock, you know, you just kind of ponder, explore the idea of some of that being the case. All right, so we are into July now. What are we talking about? Out of Waukegan, just to recap for those of you watching, we're talking about, he mentioned that, you know, every month of the year, there's always something you can target. So now we're halfway through the year into July. What's that one species?
I think if the coho are early and the bait is early, July is typically going to be a less reliable time for coho. Whereas if the bait and coho are late, like middle to the end of May or even June 1st or so, your July is going to be better for coho. That's just been my observation. I'm not sure if I have enough data points to say this is what happens every single time, but that's just been my recollection over the past 8 years or so. So honestly, in some ways, you kind of want the bait not to show up until May 10th or so. That way you can pick.
He's got it on the calendar.
Yeah, that way you can.
It better not show up before this date.
That way you can pick away at those browns and those lake trout and still get some coho throughout that period of time, and then that will give your coho season longevity typically into July. Whereas if you're hammering coho from mid-April to late April, I don't want to say there's going to be less to catch, but I think their behaviors are going to be somewhat different, and they're going to leave the area sooner. You're still going to be catching coho. You're going to be catching mixed bags in July. Pre-stocking cuts, that's when you're going to start to catch kings, even as early as early July, even as early as late June. But we haven't had one of those seasons in 7, 8, 9 years. And I think that will begin to change, hopefully, in the next few years, now that the increases have gone through. I was hoping that this past year was going to be the year that we really felt a more substantial king population, with Wisconsin going to 1.2 million. Excuse me, I think about, was it 3 years ago, 2 years ago? Mm-hmm. So we should have seen more 3-year-olds last year than that I would have liked. But then again, Michigan was still really not up to the number that they had been to the pre-cut level. But they're getting there. That's kind of suggestive of what kings do we catch? Do we catch Wisconsin kings? Do we catch Michigan kings? We probably catch both. Really. Sure.
Yeah. Sure. Let me do. I'm gonna spitfire the last of these. So just name the species, because other things I want to follow up on here, and I don't want to make sure we have enough time to fit it all in. Yeah. So we got July. Okay, August.
A continuation of July. It's going to resemble July.
Okay.
You're going to start to get some more steelhead. You're going to have a very diverse spread out there. You're going to have stuff for coho. You're going to have stuff for kings. You're going to have stuff for steelhead. Maybe a rod on the bottom for lake trout. It's going to be very, very diverse. You're going to take what you can get, and hopefully it's going to be a lot of what you can get.
September.
Lake trout.
October.
I'm off the water. I've tried to fish October. There was 1 year where it was lights out for 2 and 3-year-old kings, but we had never seen a season like that since. The weather just doesn't. The weather just really keeps you. It's rough, and it's sometimes you go out, you think it's going to be great. The wind is only blowing 7-8 miles an hour, and you're thinking, oh my God, what a great October day. And then once you pass 100 feet of water, it's 3 to 5 foot waves, and you're like, what happened? Yeah. And so it's tough to fish. You're going a long way. You're only catching one species. But before you get to that point, that July and August, you're gonna have setups for shallow water fishing for brown trout. And you're going to have that setup is going to be fostered by an offshore wind, a west wind, or any variation of it. It's going to be south of the harbor. It's going to be where I'm typically fishing in April. but it's going to be pretty much only brown trout. Even you need a lot of, it depends how much warm water has been walled up on the shoreline, but you're typically going to need several days of a really high west wind to get that surface water pushed out of there and that upwelling to occur. It doesn't have to be ice cold, and in fact, even the surface water doesn't have to be cold. I have fished in there when the surface has been 68, but you have a thermocline down 8 to 10 feet, and that's where it changes to the high 50s or mid 50s, and you can catch browns under those circumstances.
And this is when you catch some really big browns.
The giants are caught in July and August. Yeah, I don't know why that is. We catch big ones in April also, but not like you catch in July and August. I don't know whether it's like pre-spawn for them, if they're herding up or gathering up. I don't know the reason for that.
What since we're talking about browns, give me an idea of what are some of these go-to lures that you're running for browns?
Well, my spread looks like 4 short color lead cores on planer boards. I'm not running divers at that point in shallow. You probably can. And
So like 1, 2, 3 colors on boards?
2s and 4s.
2s and 4s? Okay.
Sometimes a 5 down the middle if the bite is kind of slow and you want to get an extra line in the water. But if the fish start to come, I typically yank the shoot rod out. So it's a simple spread. It's those 4 cores and then 2 downriggers.
What's on them though?
I like the mongoose stinger. That's a good one. I like the gold two-face stinger. That's a UV. The gold NBK. Browns like gold, but they don't have to come on gold. You want some gold in the water, but some of the rest of us that do this, their spread is going to look totally different than mine.
Sure.
And they're still going to catch fish too. So.
Yeah, and you ring them throughout the water column, so they're not shy to come up and.
Not in my experience. No, I've had days where I'm fishing, and I'm not really fishing. I'm generally fishing 16, 18 to 30 feet of water, but I'm not fishing the way I am fishing for salmon. I'm not taking like one pass south, one pass north. I'm kind of weaving in and out and stuff like that, and I'm finding out where my bites are coming, and then once I figure out where my bites are coming, then I'm gonna
dial it in.
Yeah, then I'm gonna start really working that general area. So there are times when even if I'm in 25, 26 feet of water at that particular moment of time where even the 2-color core is gonna get hit by browns and even big browns.
Oh, that's pretty awesome. That's really awesome.
It is, and they hit those things so hard. I run offshore boards, the yellow ones with the Sam's Pro release on there, and the way they hit them, you can hear it on the boat, and it just goes whack, and then all your customers are looking around, and it's almost equivalent to saltwater fishing where if a big fish or a billfish takes something off of an outrigger, and you can hear it, and it's really cool.
Yeah.
It's weird. For some reason, Waukegan summer browns are like the hardest fighting browns that I've caught. And I don't understand why, but I've had the biggest battles with browns down there compared to everywhere else that I've caught them.
Have you fished down in that?
You know,
Not well. Even like I've caught them more around the harbor.
Right,
I haven't gone as far south as you go, but yeah, the ones that I've caught right in front of the harbor were just they hit like kings.
So I have a theory. They grew up in Chicago.
Yeah, the neighborhood.
The Chicago Browns. They don't take no crap. Grew up in the mean waters of Chicago.
Let's think about where browns are stocked. They're stocked in Waukegan. They're stocked in pretty much every Illinois port.
Yeah.
I believe, is it like 10,000 a port?
Yeah,
Something like that. Yeah.
it's,
Well, they don't all go to that area where I'm fishing, but there are more in that area than there are in Waukegan. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something that keeps them there.
Yeah.
And I think it's the contour, it's
contours.
the undulation of the bottom.
Yeah. Let's talk about, let me see where I want to go first. Okay. Let's talk about, so we're talking about fish, and you talked about stocking. What are your thoughts on the current stocking levels out of Waukegan?
The levels, I think, I'm not sure they've changed a whole lot over the years, at least to my knowledge. I would like to see some modifications changed as to the methods in which they are stocked, because, and Vic and I have talked about this, there's no easy answer in there. except that I suggested that maybe they try to stock in the North Harbor instead at night when the birds aren't as active. And the pushback is always, well, we account for loss of birds and stuff like that. And, maybe the cost to raise 150,000 fingerlings is the same cost to raise 100,000 fingerlings. I don't know that answer, but maybe it is. I don't know, but I just know that whenever the truck rolls up on the pier in the South Harbor and they fit the hose, it's almost like the birds already know what's about to happen, and it's nuts. I mean,
you've seen Finding Nemo, right?
Yeah.
Remember the birds? Mine. They all just show up. Mine.
Every guest on my boat talks about that when I'm cleaning fish in the back of the boat, and I'm talking But so I know I actually have never seen the movie. I will be seeing it soon because my daughter is 5. So.
Oh yeah.
But so I'd like to see different methodologies, possibly at night, possibly in a different location, because the South Harbor where they stock, it's a predator pit. There's pike in there. There's steelhead. There's trout in there. There's bass. I don't know whether there is the same kind of population of game fish in the North Harbor as there is in the South Harbor. My guess is no. That's one possibility. And so when I suggested outside the South Rocks to Vic, he said, we want them to be in a sheltered environment for a while. Well, I mean, sheltered where there's a bunch of game fish isn't that great of an idea. But then again, if you put them outside the rocks on the south side of the harbor, the salmon and trout are going to eat them also. I've cleaned plenty of salmon and trout with young salmon inside. So the next logical choice would be the North Harbor. Again, no easy answers, but I think some modifications could be made.
Yeah. And the numbers-wise, increase generally? And if so, what species would you like to see increased?
Kings. Yeah, I did. So when I was away most of the fall, but a couple of guys were talking about the number of kings that were rolling in the fall in Waukegan Harbor.
Yeah. It's impressive. I'm telling you, the last couple of years, it's been
we've
really
seen
been
a really good fall run.
Really good fall run
compared to several years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's been great opportunities for shore guys, the kayak guys, small boat guys to come out there and
they're all catching them. We can't catch them though.
Yeah, well,
we can't. It doesn't. The fishery for us, it doesn't exist anymore. It used to when I was a kid, but the water was a lot different back then.
Now you're talking about you can't in terms of for staging fall kings or the fall run.
It's a tough bite for charters these days because it's like what we see a short window, like a bite window is much shorter than it used to be because of the water clarity, right? And the numbers still aren't what they used to be. Like back in the day, a charter could go and catch 15 stagers fairly easily, and it was dirty water. You could catch them almost all morning. Now it's not quite like that. You're kind of committing to something that might be over with pretty quick.
I did it for the first time in, I think it was 2021. I had a guest who wanted to learn how to fish. He came out with me solo 7 times. He came up and bought a bunch of gear from Rob, and we spent a lot of time together. Great guy, and I had shown him pretty much every fishery I could except for offshore lake trout because he wasn't interested in it. And so the last one was middle of September. Okay, let's rig out for staging kings, and we did it. And I said, listen, I mean, I want you to know we might not get anything. And we fished and we fished and we fished, and we covered a lot of water, up and down the channel, off the lighthouse, off the rocks, just everywhere you could possibly go. And then it wasn't until like 20 minutes left in the charter when we didn't even catch a king, but we caught a spawner coho. So but my game was based more upon what I used to do back in the 80s for that. It was J plugs, and maybe that's not what we should be running for those fish here for that anymore. I don't know. Maybe we should be running more flashers or spoons, mag spoons, or I don't know.
There is something that's been growing. I don't know. We'll talk about it now, but there's definitely been something that a lot of guys been doing for the fall that
Yeah,
been working
that's
really
maybe that's
well.
me just kind of thinking, well, maybe there's hope for some kind of different fishery rather than blasting 10 miles offshore for lake trout.
Right. Yeah. So Waukegan, as we've talked about, has been super popular, and for guys that don't want to have to cross over into Wisconsin, it's their last stop, right, on the road, really, because outside of this time of year when the water's cold and it's still cold out, you can go and launch out of Burnham, you can go launch out of 95th and be successful, bang the lake trout off the break walls, fish for perch. You got options, you know. But once we get into the warmer period, water warms up, you really kind of, I mean, outside of the charters that are out in Chicago, but I'm talking about now small boat guys that want to come out, weekend guys, Waukegan is like the spot you're going to come to. What tips could you share for folks that are newer to the area, newer to Waukegan and its waters here? What are some things, some tips you can share with them to help them kind of get acclimated, put them in the right direction for their first kind of early experiences fishing out of the port?
Yeah, I'd say early season is you're not going to have to go far. I mean, you might be going farther north or south, but you're not going to probably be fishing much out of 35, 40 feet of water unless you really want to. Unless the water is too stirred up. If it's brown, you don't really want to be there.
Yeah.
If it's that kind of greenish, aqua chalky color, that's a good color to be fishing, and that's kind of more like old time color. And explore if you're going to try fishing from Great Lakes down south. Kind of commit to the area. Don't, just because you take a pass or two doesn't mean it's not going to happen. You know, kind of work the area, work the. When you get a bite or two, then you work those areas down south. I think another thing to keep in mind is, especially during the season when these coho are smaller, depending upon the size of the alewives they're feeding on, they're not going to be feeding all day long. They're gonna eat an alewife or two, and they're going to be full for 3-4 hours. Mm-hmm. So if there is a feed and it stops, you know, you just got to wait them out at that point.
Got you.
And or, you know, that brown area down from Great Lakes on south, you know, run that diversified spread with spoons and orange red dodgers and flies down there, because you're gonna get those mixed species. I've caught browns on the orange dodgers. I wouldn't fish with them with the orange dodgers, but you can catch them with the orange dodgers. You can catch lake trout with the orange dodgers also, but the trout are gonna come more in the spoons though.
Got you. Yeah, super cool, because a lot of people, as we see, it's not uncommon these days. You show up on the weekend, and if you're not there, you know, by 4, you're gonna have a hard time finding a spot in the lot to park and to get out there and all that. But that's a lot of great opportunities for sure. Rob, any thoughts?
Yeah, you know what? We talked a bit about the shallow structure, especially further south, but Waukegan has a lot of other structures, a lot of reefs. You got the North Reef, the South Reef,
Yes.
stuff like that. Can you kind of go over the layout of that a little bit?
And maybe how do you fish the reefs? Because you got the South Reef, you got the North Reef as well, right? Mm-hmm. And then you can even go further south, and there's some other stuff down there too.
There's all kinds of stuff down
right.
south. Yeah.
So yeah, could you, like Rob said, can you expand on reef fishing? Mm-hmm. What opportunities are there? When and why you'd want to go fish the reefs, and for what?
Yeah, typically you're gonna find yourself at the reefs a lot of times out of a
desperation.
Not so much desperation, more,
Tough day.
more being
I'm joking.
as a place to go,
Yeah.
as a destination. But also especially after a blow, after like a big northeast or an east blow, that kind of thing, or a north blow, anything that's going to really create a downbound, outbound current that's going to send cold water out, and I think, you know, those offshore structures serve as, you know, current deflections for the bait and stuff like that, and that's gonna hold game fish, whether they're going to be right down there with the bait or just generally in the area. But yeah, North Reef is somewhere that I don't go as often. I do have really good memories of pre-stocking cuts of catching kings near the North Reef, especially on a north wind, personally fishing it north and south. There's a place that's just south of the North Reef, and it's only just a little hump on the bottom. And there was well, we always have that one time, but I can't get this out of my mind. But still, I mean, it was a king massacre. It was 3-year-old kings and 4-year-old kings. It was 3 to 5 out of the Northeast, and every time I went over that little teeny hump, it was fish or two, fish or two, fish or two, and fishing that way back and forth in 3 to 5 foot is not an easy thing to do. But when you come in with 25 fish and 7 of them are 4-year-old kings, that's a special day. So you got that the North Reef. I don't have a whole lot of experience with what's called the Mesa, which is outside the North Reef. I know that's more of a North Point territory. Then you've got South Reef. The South Reef is really interesting. It's like a big dome with a lot of rocks on it. You have the northeast side of it drops off super quickly. I've had a lot of success in the spring when we have coho offshore, fishing over the South Reef to the east and then heading northeast off that deep drop. Still, we're catching coho on the surface, but that's where the bite was. On the backside of the North Reef, you have a series of rock piles that...
North or South Reef?
I'm sorry, South Reef.
Okay.
So I'm doing it backwards in the camera, but
Sure.
if you're looking at the South Reef, it would be a string of rock piles from the outside of it that swings all the way down to the south side of it, and that holds a ton of fish. We're starting to believe that those rock piles are maybe connected with the Lake Bluff Reef, which is where we find ourselves more often than not fishing for lake trout. It has been the more productive area over the past 3 to 5 years or so. There's areas in between the Lake Bluff Reef and the South Reef that have held lake trout, even though there isn't a ton of structure right there, but you're between.
It could be like
spots.
maybe it's like a highway between the two,
Exactly,
perhaps, right?
exactly.
Because fish will have like these paths that they will, stick to, generally speaking.
Right. From the Lake Bluff Reef, if you go from the Lake Bluff Reef on a specific heading, which is generally southeast, you'll run into Julian's Reef, which is legendary to a lot of people. That's where a lot of commercial fishing for lake trout was done in the very, very early days of like pre-1950. I think they still stock Julian's. I think they still stock the South Reef. But I've had good success from not even specifically fishing the Lake Bluff Reef, but fishing over it or next to it, and then taking a heading to Julian's and just picking up lake trout on the way there. And sometimes it's so good that you can't even turn. You don't want to turn. You end up at Julian's, and you're figuring to yourself, well, maybe I should take a couple of spins around Julian's. I've only fished Julian's specifically to fish Julian's once or twice, and that's more out of, you don't have to go there anymore because it's like 15 miles or so. But it probably holds a lot of fish. I think it's an exotic destination.
Something to kind of knock off the list. Hey, I went out to this reef and did down take advantage of a nice day and go for a nice ride. And
it is a heck of a piece of structure from what I've seen. I mean, there's like ledges and steep drop offs, and people have told me that pre-stocking cuts that they've caught all kinds of kings there. It's a place to consider to go, definitely, and it doesn't have to even be for lake trout. So moving from Julian's, Lake Bluff Reef to Julian's, inside of Lake Bluff, and then south of that from about Lake Bluff to what we would call like 13 or 12 on the latitude line, that would put you down towards, I want to say like Highland Park or even a little bit south of there.
Highland,
yeah, there's a lot of rock piles like in the 85 to 95 foot range, where if the water's cold there, you can catch lake trout there. I've tried to fish that for kings before, and it's kind of hit or miss. I don't think the kings really like to live down there. And then further south of that is, of course, R4. R4 is more more for Chicago boats. It's
Yeah.
closer for them. I've been there once, and it's basically because I pointed the boat there. I went there. When I got there, I turned around and I came back home. I didn't. Even though I was at an 8-hour, I didn't have enough time to fish it.
Wow. Yeah. There's a lot of opportunities, and it's also a point to make on, as we're talking about these reefs, you know, a lot of guys will fish them, put the riggers down there, but also be careful because this is a classic way that you'll visit us at the shop because you'll have lost a rigger ball or lines will get tied down there. A deep diver will catch something weird because you'll go from 100 something and you're just shooting the breeze on the boat and you'll turn around and you're in 70 and there's your whole.
Yeah, if you're structure fishing, and
Yeah.
especially if you're tapping bottom, there's no shooting the breeze under that scenario.
And even if you're not, because you could be having a line 80 down and you're in 150, whatever. You're like, oh, it's fine. And you turn and you're up in 70 feet. And so now that diver is probably, you know, digging in or catches something. So word to the wise, if you go to these structures, really take your time, use your electronics to start mapping stuff out, getting a feel for these areas, you know. And,
I mark a lot of spots. I watch my screen probably more for structure than anything else, and
Right.
I mark them when I go over them, so that way I know where they are.
you know where they are, yeah. To avoid that. As we come to a close on this podcast, we did ask you to run through the shop and pick out 5 different items. It could be anything that just for you are, you know, go-tos or essentials that really help you to put fish into the boat. So love for you to kind of go through each of these items you have here, explain what it is and why it's a go-to for you.
Yeah, moonshine blue flounder. UV is awesome. Also, regular is it's a very consistent spoon.
Is there a rhyme or reason when you go regular versus a UV for you?
More during the sunlight hours, I would use UV.
Okay. So you might start early in the morning with the regular non-UV and then switch?
Yeah.
Okay.
But you know, they're both still going to work into the daylight hours.
Yeah.
I think the UV probably outperforms a little bit more in the daylight hours. You know, it's been around for 12 years, and it's not a spoon that like just works for me. It works for every boat, really. So that's that one. This is a little bit different one that not a lot of people run it. It's called the Bad Toad Moonshine. It's a good king spoon. I prefer the non-UV over the UV, although they both work very well. It does catch other species, but it's got, when I look at it, even before it was working well for me, it's got that king look to it. It's got the spots and all that kind of stuff, and the kings seem to dig that.
I'll start the morning in the dark. Yeah. This will be on the line. And we've done it on the boat too. Bad Toad is such a sleeper.
It seems to be a really good August spoon.
Right. Yeah, it's a later season spoon. I did have an experience. This is actually a funny story. I had a group out early June last year. So again, we had coho early. You know, we whaled on coho all of late April, all of May, and then early June comes, and it's starting to get, you know, fish are leaving the area, and we're not lock and loading the coho like we were, and so it was a little more challenging. And I had a crew out that's been out with me a lot, and you know, we're searching for fish. We're getting fish, but we're not killing them. And I have this thing out on I don't know, maybe a 5-color or so, and we're fishing off the stacks or off a Larson, and that thing goes off 4 times in a row with a brown trout every single time. And so here I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, let's get some brown trout stuff out. I got all my brown trout stuff out there, and I left that out there. Nothing worked after that. It's the nature of the beast. Mm-hmm. So this is something that you wouldn't ever pick for brown trout, but that particular day, 4 of them wanted it. I don't know. This one this isn't the exact spoon. You didn't have the one here that I was thinking of, but the one that I was thinking of was what's called a two-face, and I like the gold two-face. The gold two-face is a solid producer for browns. Coho like it, kings love it. I'm not sure about steelhead, but that's one that I have out a lot. Yeah. So much so that I had Rob order 48 of them for me like 2 or 3 years ago.
He's got plenty to. We can borrow a couple from him. I like this one. It's one of my faves.
Caramel dolphin.
Yes, caramel dolphin.
I like the stingray and the magnum for lake trout actually, and for kings, but I like the standard size UV for pretty much everything else. Yeah. So I would prefer to go with the standard. If only allowed, one caramel dolphin, it would be the standard UV one.
What? Let me ask you this because I this is something that I do. But what time of the year does this go on for you? Is there
all year?
All year?
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's what makes it good.
July for me is when it'll
probably shine different times of the year. But it's a multi-species spoon, and that's multi-species and all year long is kind of
the goal.
Yeah.
For starter, because you're trying to put fish in the boat. Sure. Yeah.
Now, stubby's all the rage. It catches a lot of fish for a lot of people. I catch fish on them. I still do prefer the big Jensen over the stubby.
The 8-inch size-O, right?
Yeah, size-O, yeah.
Oh, so hard to come by.
Yeah, you can't find them unless you look on eBay and that kind of thing. But so let's kind of branch off with the orange is, you got to consider the double orange for coho in the spring. So orange or red for coho primarily, whether it's stubby, Jensen, small or large. That's the go-to setup for coho. And the fly that I would pick is, you just happen to have had this one.
It's been here for like 4 episodes already.
I'll be
has anybody noticed this in the comments yet? This has been sitting right here the whole time.
Well, this is I think what you guys call
the next gen.
Next gen, yeah. So we call it down in Waukegan, we call it improved, or we call it Aqua Mirage. I tie peanuts of that version, either on a number 2 or a number 4 hook, and to me, that's this particular pattern, whatever size you have, is probably the most consistent coho
all around
taker there is. Yeah.
Do you happen to run stubbies or your Dodgers? Well, you're running your 8-inchers right throughout the year, or at least into the summer. Is that the idea?
It's more of a June, July kind of thing. I'm not going to really have many out in May. Although I was kind of thinking that maybe I should consider that, but you only have so many options to choose from as far as what you can put out. But yeah, it's more of a June, July option. It seems to be an option that you choose when the coho start to settle down a little bit more, start to move out a little bit more, when they're not feeding on the surface as much, when they're a little bit larger, those kinds of things. I'm sure they can catch fish in May, but why run an 8-inch when you can catch them on a 6? It's less gear to fight.
Yeah.
So, but one of the older guys who is still around, he told me that in the maybe in the 70s, is that they ran the big ones on yellowbirds because they didn't have or didn't know about the little ones. And I'm just thinking, the amount of drag on a yellowbird with a big one, but he said they caught fish nonstop. Then again, that's all that was in the water.
Yeah.
So that's all the fish had to choose from.
Yeah, very little options back then. No, that's pretty amazing. Well, listen, this has been a great conversation, and especially as we talked about Waukegan. Was there anything that we may have missed that it comes to mind that you wanted to talk about as it pertains to Waukegan, the fishery out of the harbor?
A couple of thoughts. I think one of your podcasts last year talked about what's some of the game changer stuff we're going to see the next couple of years. Or
so the question was,
5 years.
I'll pose it to you. In your opinion, what is the next big revolutionary thing in salmon fishing? Right, like when wires came around, that was a big deal. When coppers were a thing, so what's the next thing as we talk about it? It's something that Rob and I have talked about. We're kind of wondering. I have my opinion on what that is. What is it for you?
I think it requires you to step back a little bit to think about the lifespan of this fishery so far. It's 56 years old. It started in 1966 when guys went out there, guys and girls went out there, either on the Michigan side or on this side. They had no idea what they were doing.
Yeah.
They were throwing just
daredevils and Impalas.
They were throwing inland stuff out there. And they caught fish. But again, the lake was loaded with fish, and coho are very, very aggressive. So it's very remarkable to think about the lifespan of this fishery and how even the tackle selection from when I did it in the 80s and early 90s to when I came back. I mean, when I came back to looking at just a chrome or a white dodger to like all these plastic flashers didn't even exist in the 80s here. That maybe they had started over on the West Coast. I'm not really sure, but and then the spoon colors totally changed, and that was all a function of water clarity. We used to fish a lot of black, a lot of green, Northport nailers with a white back, that kind of thing. The silver fin spoon, which I still use, was just starting to come onto the scene, and that would work pretty well. And it works well for me now. I'm one of the only guys that runs it, but I only run it under specific conditions. But it is remarkable to see the tackle just branch out, and the availability and the confusion that it causes in everybody's heads. I mean, you go to the rack and you look and you're thinking, God, well that might look good, that might look good. I mean, it's just it in a lot of ways it's overwhelming to a lot of people. And I think Caleb did a show last year with you guys that talked about keeping it simple, and that's a great piece of advice. And I think a lot of us have kind of strayed off into let's kind of complicate it a little bit, and then you end up shooting yourself in the foot. But back to your question, what's game changer stuff in the future? I'm kind of thinking that tackle wise, it's probably less in that direction. I think it's technology, and I think we're seeing it with the live scope.
Yep.
I'm curious about live scope. I've never seen it in person. To my knowledge, I'd like you to so you can watch a screen and you can watch fish move into your spread, and that's super cool.
Yeah, I've been saying this, and I don't have any connections to Garmin. I use their product or whatever, but just as a user, and I got into it last August. I got my setup. So, I'm gonna make the jump. So I make videos.
On the kayak?
On the kayak. Yeah. And what I can tell you is that it 100% helped my offshore fishing. When you're up close, you don't need it. It's cool to watch them hit shallow in the spring or whatever, or in the fall, like watching the kings. Yep. But you pretty much know I'm just going to put cranks in and just go.
Yeah.
But in the summer, when you're fishing deep, you've got thermoclines, and these fish can be very moody and all that stuff. It 100% helped me catch more fish, for the simple fact that I'm able to no longer guess what kind of mood they're in or how they're reacting to the spread. I can actually see. So a perfect example happened with me last year was I had a flasher fly, maybe it was Dragon Slayer, maybe a chrome NBK I had down with a fly down the back. And then I had spoon on one, and I might have had like a Dodger fly on another down, right? I consistently watched as fish would come up into the cone and nose the fly on the flasher right down my chute. Wouldn't hit it. And I'm like, come on. I'm sitting there, come on. They break off. And not very long after, the rod goes off. And I'd see another fish come up, nose, break off. And I noticed that. I decided to leave this flasher fly in the water. It was bringing fish in, and not too long after, I would get a hit or a
What kind of fish do you think these were?
Oh, it was coho.
Coho?
Yeah, it was coho.
Okay.
Yeah. This is when I caught my new PB, 14 pounds or whatever it was. So I was watching it. Now,
So this is probably August last year?
was that when I caught him?
You caught it in August.
I called you? Yeah.
That's when we were catching all those big coho.
Yeah.
Yep.
So now, if I hadn't had that, what would I have done? I would be like, no, it's not hitting this thing. I'm not getting no action on that rod. I'm catching fish over here. Let me just change out the flasher fly. If I would have changed it out and no fish are coming in, what would have happened? So to me, what it is reaffirms the theories a lot of the old timers will speak on, which is a flasher can bring fish into your spread. They'll break off and hit something else.
Right.
So I think it helps you to visualize what they're doing. If they're coming up to something in your spread, if they're coming in hot on it, you also kind of really see the angles at which they come. A lot of times you think perhaps you're trolling in this direction, that they're just going to come up from behind, most of the fish that I saw were coming from, so if the lure is going this way, they're coming head on from like a 45-degree angle, either from the top down or from the bottom up.
It all makes sense.
And they'll come up and then they'll turn on it. Now they're behind it. And it's so cool to see it with such clarity. And so I just think, like you said, what it does is it helps to inform your decisions on whether you're going to keep that rod in the water or you're going to switch it quicker.
Yeah.
And if you're able to be more efficient, you're going to get more fish in the boat. That's where I think that technology for salmon fishing is what, and more guys are starting to tinker around, adding it to their boats. It obviously is a big kind of an expense, and then you got to make it work with your current electronics. So it can be, a lot to do, but I think the investment could be worth it for it's not an essential thing by no means, it's not essential. But
it could be. It could be. I mean, could you see it become a more important tool than just the regular screen, the regular fish finder?
Yeah, I when I started fishing with it, I'd have like a split screen, and maybe in about 2 weeks after that, I'm watching the live scope. Yeah. I got the depth on it. I need the depth because think about it. We generally know where we're fishing. If you're on the hill, inside the hill, we kind of know what's there already. I don't need to see the bottom, perhaps. I'm just looking now to see how are they reacting to my spread, my lures. Do I need to make a change quicker? Can I make that quicker? Or if they're coming up to something, and you can see with such clarity with the newer versions that they've just come out with. And if you're in a boat, and for anybody watching this, if you are tinkering and thinking of doing this, you definitely want to go with the XR. It gives you 500-foot range. So if you're in your bigger boat, you want that extended range so that you can turn it in perspective. I think is probably the better way for a boat to run it. Run it in perspective mode so that you can see, you get that 140-degree beam from side to side so that you can see a little bit more of your gear, your rigger, maybe some of your divers. You're not going to see like your long lines and stuff like that, perhaps like your lead cord. But you can see like your lead cord, or you can see your riggers and maybe your inside divers, stuff like that, stuff that's tighter to your boat, and you can set it at the right angle and you can watch it all.
Can you detect species of fish?
Yeah. Sometimes. Yes and no. It depends. For me, it is if you're in shallower water, and then you kind of have to know what you're fishing. So, for instance, I can tell the king, right? Literally the imaging is so good. You can see the tail, the broom tail on them when in the right angle to hit the cone the right way. But generally, I can see the whole outline. I'll show you screenshots when I've taken my phone where you can just see the outline. That's a king, 100%. You could tell.
Yeah,
it's really cool.
It's going to take off. Does it? Yeah. Can it show thermocline or like
temp breaks and stuff like that?
Current and particles in the water, things like that.
Yeah, well, it'll if you put up the gain enough, it'll pick up all that crap in the water. Okay. I never set it.
Can you see which way it's going?
Which way?
Can you tell? Like, so if you're on an east heading, can you look at your screen to see if water is moving in a certain direction with those particles, meaning a current? Can you detect the direction of a current?
Not that I don't even think I attempted to. That might be something to think about now to try out, but no, I don't even know if that's possible to tell which kind of way things are going. But you can set it up so that on your fish finder, there's like on the corner of the screen, it'll show you what angle in relation to your boat you've got your cone facing. If you want to set it up on like on a mount or some sort, but nothing like that I'm aware of. Yeah. Not that I've tested.
So that's one good example. I think technology is where we're going to start to see a lot of advances. I think about drones a lot. I don't know. I don't know what kind of applications yet we're going to have on the Great Lakes or down here on Lake Michigan specifically, but I've thought about, what if I'm fishing in 40 feet of water off the Navy base and not much is going on and there aren't many other boats out and nobody else is doing anything? Can I send out a drone to look for schools of bait and fish on the surface? Because that's where they're living. They don't have to be on the surface, but that's just like one idea that we might have potential with. And then, of course, just other things you can't even think of. That's where I think some of the next killer killer things are.
Yeah, it'll definitely be cool to see. Because I think gear wise, I mean, there's only so many ways you can make a dodger and a flasher, you know, or tie a fly, and
well, I mean, we're always going to have the hot spoon or the hot whatever every single season, and you're always going to have the stuff that works every single season, or hopefully works nearly every single season. But Rob, have you heard of anything else interesting out there from a technology perspective that could be coming?
I haven't really. I mean, it's just
Rob likes to troll with just a rod and a hook on it. So
I try to keep it as basic as simple. Like, try to outfish everybody without any technology.
Yeah,
she's taking a shot at me right now. We always, what a jerk.
Oh, by the way, I did win, or I came third in the tournament with no electronics. Yeah. So.
Hey, there's something to be said about that too.
Yeah, my batteries all died. I couldn't recharge them.
But listen, not to take anything away from you, but I did say, like, when you're fishing shallow spring and fall for coho or the kings, you don't need it, right? We know what it is. You just put a line in the water. You're just going to work this area because they're going to be here. We know what lures work. Again, for me, I think when you're offshore is where it really helps a lot.
Yeah, it does.
Because one thing is, when you're trolling and you're looking at your 2D sonar and it's just all blue, and you're just like, I'm not marking anything, right?
Right.
With the live scope, there's fish. They're just not in the cone, but they're around. When you don't mark any bait or anything, there's still fish. I would watch them come, and I'm like, wow, there's a lot in 60 feet of water. Even though on the 2D, it'd let you believe they're not here.
Yeah,
but they're around.
I've got my sonar on my home, like in the corner of my home, and so a lot of times people can't see it, and then they'll pick up on it when I start looking at it. And I run my boat by myself, especially if I'm in the back of the boat and I'm looking over and I'm looking at the screen, and everybody thinks that I'm looking at them, and so they're just like looking around. It's kind of funny. But then I say, I'm looking at the screen up there, and then they're all about the screen. Then they want to watch the screen, and they think the screen is like the holy grail of fishing. And I just say, it's one more tool, and there are plenty of times when we can catch fish and never mark fish, and plenty of times where you mark fish and never catch fish.
Yeah, if I was a captain, I would just I'd record a screen and run on the loop with all the fish. Yeah, guys, we're in the jackpot.
Yeah, but then you can't catch them though,
right?
They just want
leave it in demo mode.
It's a double-edged sword, though. Yeah, if you're marking too many fish but you can't catch them, makes you look bad. If you're in an area where there are no fish, you made the wrong decision. You went to the wrong place.
There's no winning.
There's no winning. That's why you kind of want to keep the screen a secret to guests in a way.
Yeah. So, that's funny.
Especially the kids. The kids want to watch the screen nonstop, and then they're in your helm and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for making time for us to come in here and talk about fishing, something we all love, and
anytime.
Again, as it pertains to Waukegan. Hopefully, you guys got some insight into what you can expect fishing out of Waukegan. I think is easily the best harbor Illinois has for salmon and trout fishing to fish out of, for all the many reasons that we talked about today. And so check it all out. And if you're new to the area, a great way to kind of learn it is getting out with Captain to learn from them and kind of experience the fishery. So with that being said, why don't you let everybody know where they can reach out to you if they want to hop on the boat with you, pick your brain, and experience the fishery.
Yeah, WindyCitySalmon.com is the website. WindyCitySalmon@gmail.com is the email. My number is 773-791-7990, and the Facebook page is the same as the website, WindyCitySalmon.com.
So make sure you check them all out. Rob, final thoughts?
No, thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. We'll see you guys soon.